Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Wade and Carter Show. Ash Brent, live from the Atzenhofer studio. Glad to be here on a Caldo Wednesday morning. Mark Kurtz, Rena Scherer, Marvin Mickish on the podium this morning. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Glad you're here. Wade and Carter weather brought to you by the great folks at AT Deerlam Hayfeed and Ranch Services.
64 degrees and sunny in Victoria, Texas. Heading to a high today of 89.
Nice. President landing in China yesterday, saying he's not going to talk to Xi Jinping about Iran, which I thought was interesting, as I figured that might be front and center to what he was going to talk about, given they're still trying to buy Iranian oil.
I didn't gather that he wasn't going to talk to him about Iran. I think he very quickly said, hey, we got other things to talk about, and they do. I think that it's going to center on the economic impact that tariffs are having on China and on their fuel and energy demands. And I think he's going to encourage China to back off of their support for Iran, which they have done against all blockades and everything else ever since this situation in Iran began. And the president's is going to say, hey, we can help you with the tariffs. We can help you get some more goods into the U.S. We can help you with a lot of things, but we don't want you supplying weapons or anything else to Iran. And we'll see what happens. So he may not talk about Iran. He may make it all about China, but with the caveat that if you continue to help Iran, it is not going to help you, which I think is smart.
Yeah. Trade, Taiwan, artificial intelligence, and maybe a little bit on Iran. But yesterday when he was leaving, he said he wasn't going to bring it up. So I thought that was interesting.
He loves to lie to the media just to mess them up.
Yeah. You hear his latest proposal?
No.
See if I can find it here. He wants to CNN reporting this morning that apparently on social media, the president teased an idea to rename and rebrand Immigration and Customs Enforcement from ICE to National Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or NICE.
That's nice. I like that.
I do too.
Yeah, I like it.
I mean, it's got a ring to it. You see what's happening in Mexico? They're cracking down on illegals. Apparently, in and around Mexico City, they went in and did a whole bunch of raids, and we're holding people in detention camps. And I don't hear the world clamoring for Mexico to stop it.
No, because they're not. They don't have the Democrats down there to scream about everything that makes sense. Did you know? I did not know that Mexico is only roughly 137 million people. I did not know that. Mexico and Canada combined aren't as big as the U.S., and we're not a particularly huge country. Is that number maybe wrong? I got that number the other day. Population of Mexico, roughly 137 million. Just half of them live in Mexico City.
Yeah. 131 million
131 million in 2024. That'll be 137 now.
Probably. About 133 according to
133 million in mid 26. And they have it down to 132, 997, 658.
That's still the 11th most populous country in the world.
1.6% of the world's population. I just always assumed that Mexico was bigger, at least as big as us. I didn't know that.
What do you make of this mayor of Arcadia, California, Eileen Wang, resigning? She's been charged with acting as an illegal agent of the Chinese government. I wonder if this will come up.
She's going to plead guilty to the charge, but they say that no, there wasn't any commingling of funds. Like, she wasn't stealing from Arcadia, California. She was just straight up an agent of the Chinese Communist Party.
She operated a website called U.S. News Center, and apparently the Chinese government would send her stories, and she would just pro-China, Chinese propaganda type stories, and she would put them on the website. I don't know exactly what information they were disseminating other than these stories, but apparently faces 10 years in prison. I doubt she'll get it. Another guy she was working with who apparently was providing a lot of the information to her, he was sentenced to 4 years in prison back in February. So
he's Mr. Sun, she's Ms. Wang. I mean, it couldn't get any more stereotypical.
So yeah, I don't know. But if she's, okay. The Chinese government sends her news stories. She posts them on her website.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're getting her on. There's got to be more to this than just that. I mean, the city says they've not done anything wrong. There was no funds go missing or anything like that. But we're going to string her up for 10 years potentially simply for reposting stories that someone in China sent her. Come on. I'm not buying it.
No kidding. Linda Chris says, hey, 20 million of the Mexican population came to the U.S. Maybe not 20 million Mexicans, but there were over 20 million illegals.
Ryan Hopping checking in. Micah Patton. BJ asks how their birth rate compares to the U.S. That's a good question. I don't know. Patrick Visconti, good morning. Scott Snow, Cody Bauman, Ricky King, Tammy Keeling, Ben Zeller.
$1.94 in 22.
And what's ours in the US?
Same roughly. I mean, we're below sustenance.
Yeah. It is called a Wednesday today, so make sure you get into Veracruz and enjoy a steamy hot bowl of caldo. Astros lose again last night.
First State Bank of Louise Astros update. Astros just terrible.
Yeah.
The Mariners have beaten them like 9 times in a row. It's just terrible. They pitching wasn't good. They didn't hit. They got beat by a touchdown. I think it was 9-2. Just not good. In other news,
10-2.
Dawn at 10-2. Yeah, they walked a guy with the bases loaded. Yeah. Dawn and I went down to Corpus yesterday to watch the Hooks. We had Josh Hader, Jake Myers, and Jeremy Pena all in the lineup. Pena got upended on a fairly routine infield play that had the crowd gasp. He ended up doing a complete head over heels or heels over head flip and was kind of down for a few minutes. And then in his next at-bat got hit in the chest. So, they took him out. That was in the 6th. He said, I'm done. And then I never saw him in the dugout after that. I think he left and went home. Hader pitched a hitless inning. I think he had 13 pitches and like 11 strikes, something like that. Did really well.
Amaya was a starting pitcher yesterday, 4 innings, 5 hits, 6 earned runs, a couple of homers, 3 strikeouts, 3 walks. He's struggling. I think he's hurt, and he's just trying to work through it, and it's not working. But the offense isn't where it was either early in the year. Altuve's down to batting .257 on a leadoff spot. You need more than that out of there. Yardon,
it's not doing much.
Falling to around a 300 average. They're not hitting anymore. Yeah.
I mean,
they're not hitting like they were at the start of the year when their offense could actually carry them to a victory. Bill Brown's going to join us here, bottom of the hour. So we'll talk a little bit about the current Astros plague, but he's got a new book out about the Cincinnati Reds and the Big Red Machine and the 50 years since they last won the World Series.
There's House District 30 State Rep AJ Louderback checking in. Good morning, sir. Always great to see your name pop up on our roster.
Austin-based think tank Texas 2036 shows that the state's public school enrollment dropped by more than 76,000 students,
which is a 1.4% decline.
Only the second one since they started tracking enrollment, though, 40 years ago. So I don't know. 81% of that decline accounted for by Hispanic enrollment. Is that because of the crackdown on immigration, you think? How much does that play into it? If we've been running illegals out of Texas.
Well, let's see. It says students in kindergarten through 5th grade accounted for 60% of the decline, while Hispanics accounted for 81%. So does that mean Hispanics were 81% of the 60%?
I think Hispanics accounted for 81% of the 76,000 or whatever it was.
Okay.
The report also says its findings do not reflect any impact of the Texas Education Freedom accounts. Well, yeah, it wouldn't because those kids haven't left school yet.
Right.
So,
doesn't mean there's not going to be impact. It just means that it's not included in this data.
No. So enrollment in public schools is falling. Well, we kind of already knew that a little bit because Dallas floated out their $6 billion bond, and they were losing 12,000 students from last year to this year. So,
look, you're not. Don't think of it as there's a group of students, 10,000 students, and 1,500 of them left your school. Think of it as the kids that are graduating or for whatever reason are leaving after their senior year aren't being replaced in the pipeline on the bottom end, on the back end by the little kids. There's not a bunch of high school seniors that are leaving Victoria West. That's not why enrollment goes down every year. Enrollment is going down because fewer kids are entering our schools than are leaving our schools for whatever reason. It's not like they all just decided to leave after their junior year in our high schools.
I think that's part of it, but it says here students in K through 5 accounted for 60% of the decline. So
that's right.
That would make sense for the there's fewer kindergartners getting in.
That's
there,
right.
But
60% of the decline is kids K through 5. So there's just not as many kids.
Yeah, but it's a 1 year reduction from year over year. So the 5th graders aren't showing up either. The 4th graders are leaving. Well, the state's growing in population. I'm just assuming maybe this is a huge. I'm thinking maybe the crackdown on illegal immigration is playing a role in these numbers.
Well, good. Then that's great.
That's just I'm guessing. I don't know.
I think that's great.
Urban district enrollment has fallen by 17% over the last 10 years and has grown in rural districts by 13.5%. So
we can start creating an all-star roster of teachers instead of, we don't need you anymore. There you go. Get some more. I like it. Jennifer Rayburn says, I just read an article that with the decline in birth rates, decreased immigration, and parental choice, the remaining public school attendees are students with greater needs by concentration. So decreased funding occurs due to lack of attendance, but the cost to educate the remainder increases, except that the state makes appropriations for all the special needs kids. So a special needs kid may get more than twice as much money allocated to his school than a quote unquote mainstream kid.
And that should probably be rephrased as decreased illegal immigration because Texas is leading or second in the country and people flocking to this state. So yeah, I mean, I think that's where it's happening. It's just interesting findings. What else? Ken Paxton now suing Netflix, saying that the streaming giant sells users' behavioral data and has engineered its platform to be addictive.
And if they do, then good for him.
Collin County lawsuit accusing Netflix of selling their info about users' viewing habits and devices to advertising companies. He says their autoplay feature also facilitates prolonged viewing and addiction to its platform. I don't know how I feel about this. I mean, it's easy to just sit there, but at the end of the day, isn't it up to you as an individual to get your ass off the couch and stop watching this stuff?
Ultimately, it's hard to legislate, personal responsibility. I saw it the other day. It said something like the difference between the messages you get from people. UPS will send you a note on your phone that says you have a package out for delivery. It will be there at 6:37 p.m.
Yep.
Thank you. FedEx sends out a note that says you have a package out for delivery. It'll be there whenever it gets there, maybe. The United States Postal Service sends out a note that says, what package? Facebook sends out a note that says, here's 500 concepts of what you ordered because we're thinking you might want to order something again. They all know. They all know what's going on.
Absolutely, they all do.
Who would it Patel agrees to an alcohol test after heated exchange with who?
I don't know. This is in the Hill.
See what that is.
It's interesting.
Cash Patel loaded?
Let's see. He apparently got into a heated exchange with Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland, and said he would take the alcohol use disorders identification test as long as he did it side by side with the senator. So right here, when your private actions make it impossible for you to perform your public duties, we have a big problem. You cannot perform those public duties if you're incapacitated. Van Hollen said to Patel during the hearing. And Patel said, do we have to subscribe? No, just stupid pop-ups.
And Director Patel, these reports about your conduct and reports of you being so drunk and hungover that your staff had to force entry into your home are extremely alarming. If true, they demonstrate a gross dereliction of your duty and betrayal of public trust. So I want to read Patel's comment back. Patel, who launched a defamation suit over the story in the Atlantic, called it unequivocally, categorically false, before launching accusations of his own, accusing Van Hollen of drinking margaritas during a visit to El Salvador. Okay. Big deal. To visit Kilmar Garcia, a man, I love that. A man mistakenly deported. He was just deported to the wrong place.
Yeah, no kidding.
The Hill must be a little leftist.
A little bit.
Yeah.
But
there you go.
I think this is interesting. And like this guy doesn't have bigger fish to fry, but it just shows you where he is right now and how desperate he is. Our own Senator John Cornyn apparently introduced legislation yesterday to rename U.S. Highway 287 in Texas as Interstate 47 in honor of our 47th president.
Second longest route, spanning 1,791 miles from Chateau, Montana to Port Arthur, Texas.
It would also spend $5.4 billion or a whole bunch of money in upgrading the roadway from a highway to an interstate. And Texas Department of Transportation found the upgrade could reduce travel time by about 7%.
Texas is Trump country, and this bill cements POTUS legacy by designating nearly 1,800 miles of open road to forever be known as the Trump Interstate. That's the most work John Cornyn's done in 10 years.
No kidding.
And I'll go further and tell you that I think James Paxton's been great for Texas as AG. I think James Tallarico is maybe the most dangerous person in this state, and he would be a terrible, terrible senator. But the idea that in the great state of Texas, we have John Cornyn, who's a do-nothing rhino, Ken Paxton, who's an embattled attorney general, where there's so much smoke around him, there's got to be a flame somewhere. Yeah. And James Tallarico, who's a communist false prophet. That is sad that is our country.
And
Kendall.
Yeah, and Tallarico's getting desperate because I've gotten 3 texts from him this week.
He's got no real chance
of the spam. This is James Tallarico. I need your money to get through this next election. Ken Paxton, according to the University of Houston poll, up 3 points in the runoff against Turn the volume up, Pete.
BJ Nelson says VISD put out 2 amazing videos where Super Sheila interviews the top 10 of each VISD high school, East and West. Please look it up and watch. It'll make you proud you live in Victoria. There you go. Let's take a quick break. It looks like our
guest is in the green room.
Is in the shop there. Folks, the chopping block, it's Wacky Wing Wednesday. No, it's not. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. Get in there today, Wacky Wing Wednesday. Get in and get a great deal on chicken wings. They also have all the beef and
the stuffed Harris Majors are back.
Jalapeno poppers and all that great stuff. Chestnut Furniture inviting you to get in and see why you just always do better at Chestnut.
Always.
Chestnut can love make your house a home. They have everything you need to outfit your home. Get in Palace Bingo, where friends meet friends. Bingo on the 20th on Wednesday. Get into Palace between now and then and enjoy supporting 7 local charities. Fantastic. USA Foundation Repair. They can shim it. They can lift it. They can make sure your driveway is level. They can put down the toughest nails, polyurethane coat that won't crack, stick, peel, or fade. Get into Veracruz today. So why don't we bring up our guest?
I will do that.
I'll trust you to do so.
I will add him to the stage.
There he is.
There he is.
Morning, guys.
And let me find the right one here. Hang on.
Let's see if we can do a little test.
Bill, you there?
Yes.
Hey, how about
All
that?
Right, there we go.
We're joined by Astros broadcasting legend Bill Brown. Bill's got a new book out. He's written several books, including a novel. He's got a new book called The Cincinnati Reds, The Reds of the 1970s. Am I close, Bill?
Yes.
You University of Missouri grad. You know, Ash is there it is.
Yeah.
Ash is
I just bought that book yesterday.
Washington State journalism grad. We know Missouri, of course, superior journalism school, but second only to Texas.
Yeah.
But we wanted to give you a chance to tell us why this project and why now. I know it's been 50 years, but now that you're retired, you've got some time on your hands and got all these memories. We want to share that with you.
You just nailed it. So last November, I'm thinking, well, gee, baseball's over. What do we do now all winter? And when you're old and you have time, you like projects. Some of us do anyway. And I like to write. I like to read about things from a long time ago. And I know 50 years ago is a significant amount of time. But in that time, as you guys have seen, you get perspective. So you interview a player who played then, and he'll say some things that he might not have said 40 years ago. Things along. So George Foster, Johnny Bench, and Raleigh Eastwick, Will McEnany, Jack Bellingham. Those guys were fantastic on the interviews we did. Of course, several guys have passed away. So the real motivation was, hey, 2026 is the 50-year anniversary of the 1976 World Series winning Reds. Second straight year they won. What can we gain from this? I know there have been several books written on it, but I talked to some friends of mine in Cincinnati who were there at that time, and they said, well, you could do another book, but you have to have a different slant on things. So tell some stories that haven't been told, things of that nature, and we'll let the readers be the judge on that. But it's out there, and it goes to the Joe Nuxall Foundation. Joe was a longtime broadcaster for the Reds. He passed away several years ago, started a great foundation for building baseball fields for handicapped in Cincinnati. So it's been a wonderful project to work on. And I think, for Astros fans, they might be asking themselves, why would I buy a book on the Cincinnati Reds? Well, it's a good general baseball history book, but there's a lot in there on that 71 trade between the Reds and Astros, the Joe Morgan, Jack Bellingham, Cesar Geronimo trade that set the Houston franchise back quite a bit.
Well,
probably 20 years.
Ash and I were reviewing data and stuff just to have a conversation with you. And Billingham on that 76 team appeared to be as close to an ace as they had, and he was only a 15-game winner. Were they just over? They went 102 games that year,
108 the
year before. Were they just killing people with their bats? Is that how they were winning so many games?
They were, but the starting pitchers were good, but not Hall of Fame good. But Billingham was solid, and he had a very nice career. I don't think he got a whole lot of credit for what he did. He typically went 6 innings or more. And, all those starting pitchers in that rotation wanted to go more innings, but Sparky Anderson was known as Captain Hook. And when he came to the mound, that was it. And Sparky had just a fantastic bullpen. He had Clay Carroll, and he had Raleigh Eastwick and Will McEnany and some other guys too in the mix. And if he had a lead after 6 innings, the game was pretty much over.
Yeah, I mean, that was a bullpen that combined, I think, for 50 saves that year. I think the leading save guy only had like 22 or something like that. It wasn't that Pedro Bourbon was part of that rotate or that bullpen. Yeah. But it wasn't like it was a kind of a bullpen by committee, but they were pretty strong. 50 saves, that's pretty impressive.
And what he would do is he'd use Eastwick one night, McEnany the next. Eastwick was right-handed, McEnany was left-handed. Didn't matter. They could both get hitters from both sides of the plate. So Sparky had plenty of options that way. And those pitchers really didn't get hurt. They just kept bouncing back. You want to pitch a guy 2-3 innings, not a problem. They were up for it, and it was a great spirit they had in that bullpen.
It's like throwing Dave Smith one night and Billy Wagner the next. We just didn't have that many saves to get.
Yeah, exactly. So, and saves were maybe not as big a thing then as they are now, but now you've got the 1 inning save typically, and that wasn't the way the game was played back then.
When you look back and you realize that Sparky was known as Captain Hook at the same time that Nolan Ryan hadn't quite perfected that curveball in that same era and was throwing 170 pitch complete games.
Yeah.
It's crazy town, the difference in the team. But we've heard this lineup referred to as the Great Eight. And when I look at bench, Tony Perez, Morgan, when there's names you don't need to name their first name, when you could go bench, Perez, Morgan, Concepcion, Rose, Foster, Geronimo, Griffey. I mean, how many of those guys are in the Hall of Fame now?
Well, so let's answer that. Well, you can say bench, Perez,
Morgan.
And Morgan, yes. Rose is not for reasons we all know about.
Yeah, sure.
Bench is among and I agree with Johnny, among many of us who think that Concepcion should be in the Hall of Fame. And people out there are saying, who? Well, you look at the shortstops of the 70s and tell me a better shortstop in the 70s.
Yeah,
Ozzie Smith came up late.
Templeton, those guys weren't hitting bombs like
right
now.
Right. So I think Davey should be in, but I think a lot of guys should be in the Hall of Fame who are not. So we have to allow for that. So let's talk about MVPs. Johnny Bench was the National League MVP in 1970 and 72. Pete Rose won it in 73. In 75 and 76, it was Joe Morgan. 77, George Foster. So you had a really dominant team, which is one of the great teams of its era. People say, well, Oakland won 3 World Series. Yeah, but Charlie Finley was the owner, and he tore that team down because of what happened after 76. That was the beginning of free agency for major league players after 6 years of service time. So that's what, in effect, really cost the Reds also. They couldn't afford to keep everybody.
And yeah, and it was an interesting era because you had the A's won 3 in a row. The Reds come back, win the next 2. How does that compare to the baseball that you've watched with the Astros and more recently? I mean, the Dodgers are probably as close as we have right now. The Yankees, the Braves of the 90s are pretty good, but could never really seem to win all the World Series that went.
Yankees haven't won in years
with their talent. Right. Is that an era that we're just, maybe Dodgers aside, or, do we have that type of ability to have teams like that can just be that competitive that many years in a row. The Astros did it for a while, but seem to be falling apart.
Right. I don't know that we do. It's a great question. I think the Dodgers, with their unlimited payroll, have the capability to do that now. But typically, injuries come along and, like they have with the Astros last couple of years. And, it looks like a very well-constructed team until the injuries start striking. And then things are not happening the way they were when the whole unit was, the Dodgers now have this luxury of this unlimited payroll, and they can sign a guy who's going to be out for the first 3 months of the season, rehabbing from an injury. And it really doesn't affect their thinking because all they're thinking about is postseason play. We'll handle his loss with our roster depth for 3 months. It's not a big deal.
The reality, though, is like the Dodgers can sign a guy like Kyle Tucker who they just don't want other people to have. It's almost like Texas football recruiting back in the 60s and 70s. But at the same time, Ash and I joke often that Kyle Tucker is still trying to collect his first hit in October. So the idea that, you play him all year, he looks great in the outfield, but then is he going to be there when it's playoff time? You made me think about two things I wanted to bounce off of you. Mm-hmm. Watching as a kid, I'm 14 in 76. So I'm watching Rose and Bench with no perspective to the fact that Pete Rose was 7 years older than Johnny Bench. I always thought of them as just peers. Yeah. Rose was probably had 2,500 hits by then. I don't know. It's crazy.
Yeah, and you're right. But that team at that point was thinking, hey, we're getting older here, even though Bench wasn't, Griffey wasn't, Geronimo wasn't, et cetera. Because of the fact that they had lost the 70 World Series to Baltimore. They lost the 72 series to Oakland. They, in 73, made the playoffs but lost to the Mets. Didn't make the playoffs in 74 despite winning 98 games. So they're thinking by 75, hey, guys, we've got to win one here in a hurry or we're not going to be here that much longer. And so there was some pressure. Even though it was not an old team, they were self-applying pressure to win that World Series.
Not to mention, Sparky Anderson always looked 97 years old.
Yeah.
So you got to win it now. You mentioned Davey in response to Concepcion. Share with us and our listeners some of the standing around the batting cage pregame. I know you were always down the field, trying to get that one little thing that a fan wanted to know that they couldn't get. Tell us some of those stories from that team and what that team was like around the batting cage pregame.
Well, Davey was always asking me to interview him because he was just lost. Yeah, what player does that now? He was just lost in the shuffle. He just couldn't get any kind of attention from the media because you had Bench and you had Rose and on and on and on. And the media just flocked to those guys. And when I was doing this research for this book on Morgan, I read his autobiography, and he was talking about when he was with Houston, he really wasn't that good a base stealer. He really wasn't that good a hitter. All those things blossomed when he got to Cincinnati. But the thing that really helped the team was the friendship and the rivalry between Morgan and Rose. They were just constantly talking baseball, and they'd get on each other about what they failed to do the previous game. And they would just drive each other to bigger accomplishments. And Morgan said that he would steal signs from the catcher, not when he was at second base, but when he was leading off first. He got a big enough lead off first to look in and see those fingers being dropped down by the catcher. And he said there was one series when the Dodgers were the opponent, and he was able to get all the catcher's signs and relay them to Johnny Bench, who was hitting behind him. He said Bench had about 10 or 11 hits in a 3-game series. He just went nuts. And then he said, we went on to San Diego for the next series, and I couldn't get the signs at all, and Johnny didn't do anything at all in that series.
Nice. You just made me think about, we had a great friend of the program, Terry Poole, Astros Hall of Famer, comes on quite often, and he tells the story about how Dusty Baker used to say that there were players that took the day off when J.R. Richard was going to pitch. And Terry Poole said, don't let Dusty kid you. He took the day off occasionally too. He said the only guy that would play every day was second baseman or shortstop. I'm drawing. I can see him. Latin player. Anyway, Terry said that guy thrived. He loved to bat off J.R. Richard, but he said don't let Dusty kid you. Dusty would take a day off.
David Lopes.
No, was it Lopes? Yeah, said he was always a gamer. You know, he never took a day off. But tell us about. Or just tell us whatever you want. Yeah, just keep going.
I remember when I was with the Reds and we'd come to Houston, and you'd have Richard and Ryan and Necro in a 3-game series. So I think Dusty was the one who said it. He said, "Well, a good 3-game series in the Dome against those guys is you go 1 for 14 and don't get hit in the head." But no, Bench sat out his share of games against J.R. Richard, and Morgan liked playing against JR because he'd walk him. Joe, with that tiny strike zone of his, he would take pitches and he'd wind up with a walk. But he was very tough for JR. But yeah, any right-handed hitter, and Perez was good. Perez would hang in there, but it was so tough against JR.
As a young journalist coming to the show, if you will,
you get there in 76. You're part of covering a team that won the World Series.
Yeah, what was that? I mean, how much of I think about like Dan Marino, coming in and going to the Super Bowl as a rookie and never getting back. Now, you got back to the World Series with the Astros against the White Sox, but instead of sweeping the Yankees like your Reds did, the White Sox swept our Astros. Yeah. Did you know at that time? I mean, obviously you knew you were part of a special team. But did you know then, like, wow, this is really special?
I have to say, yeah, you lack a lot of insight when you're 25 years old.
Yes,
but I did. I was intimidated because I was younger and these guys were such great players. I didn't really hang around them all that much. Did some interviews with them, of course. But I was a little intimidated. They knew so much about baseball that I did not know. I was just trying to soak up what I could being around them. But I do remember after they won in 75, that was such a great World Series, maybe the greatest of all time. In 76, they were struggling early in the season. We were in Pittsburgh. We had a rain out. And I was hanging out with some of my media buddies, sports writers, and we went to a Chinese restaurant. We saw Tony Perez, Dave Concepcion were there. A couple other Hispanic guys were there. They said, "Hey, come on, we'll just get a big table." And now that would not happen today. But anyway, we sat down at a big table, and they had all received their World Series rings from 75. And I didn't get one because I was not broadcasting the games that year. I was covering the team, doing like a pregame show. And so the Reds gave me a watch, a nice, World Championship watch. So I was happy. And so they were all showing off their rings. And Perez looked over and he said, "You don't have a ring." And I explained it to him. And he said, "Well, we'll get you one this year." And darned if they didn't, but that was the confidence and the camaraderie of that group. They knew they were going to win. There wasn't any doubt in their mind. They didn't show up to play a game. They showed up to win a game. And a lot of that was based on just attention to detail, how they would share things with each other, and they all were learning their way through. Morgan he had a notebook on the pitchers, and he'd keep, okay, this pitcher, when he moves his glove, he's going to the plate, something like that. And he'd share that with the other guys, and that team stole a lot of bases.
I look at that, and when you talk about that showing up to win, I think about the energy level and the competitive nature of Bench and Morgan and Rose and the aggressiveness of Griffey. And, I can bounce up to like a Chipper Jones, a young Ken Caminetti, that intensity. The Killer Bees had that similar intensity. But, that's largely lost in baseball these days. There's a lot of guys Altuve gets a double and some guy from shortstop walks over and they chit chat for a minute. I mean, Bob Gibson would have turned around and hit that shortstop in the face and said, let's play baseball.
Yeah, there were not a lot of hugs around the batting cage back in those days. There really weren't.
Yeah.
What looking back, what was because you look at that lineup from 76 to 77, still pretty consistent, still a lot of those same guys. They got Tom Seaver that year. Why the big drop off from 76 to 77? Have you ever really been able to put your finger on it as to one reason as to why?
The reason that the players kept telling me over and over and over again was we did not have Tony Perez in our clubhouse. And this all is a chain reaction from the fact that everybody knew there was a work stoppage briefly in spring training in 76. And it was all over the judge's ruling that there was going to be free agency in baseball. And so this agreement was reached once they got the work stoppage solved, got back to spring training, that, okay, guys with 6 years of Major League service time, if they don't have a signed contract, will be free agents after the 76 season. Well, this was a huge bonanza to the players, because looking back at their salaries now, which you'll see in the book if you look at yours that you just got, you would say, what? Don Gullett was making $60,000? You've got to be kidding me. And but that's 50 years ago. There's been a lot of inflation, however, still. And that's another thing that we didn't touch on earlier, but nobody had a payroll. No team had 5 times the payroll of another team. All the payrolls were, somewhat similar. Nobody had a tremendous edge in that regard. So the players just weren't raking in. The top paid guys on the Reds in 76 were making $200,000. And that would be Morgan and Bench and Rose. We're all in that. Rose wasn't quite there, but he was mad because they wanted to give him a cut. And and this is kind of the way the players did not have leverage in those days. Well, they gained it after 76. So I departed from the storyline, but that was that Gullett was going to be a free agent after the 76 season. The Reds could not sign him. He got a high-powered agent. He was told by his agent, Jerry Kapstein, who was one of the top agents of the day, hey, don't throw this winter because you need to be healthy when you get to camp. And then they had players only workouts while they were trying to get the work stoppage solved. And Gullett was told by his agent, don't work out with your team. You don't want to risk an injury. Well, he showed up. His arm was not in shape. He wasn't ready to start the season. That's why he only won 11 games that year. He missed a lot of games, and then he had a neck injury and some other things cropped up even once he did get ramped up and start pitching. So then, you had Perez, who was always the leader in the clubhouse, and he always drove in the tough runs. And they lost that when he was traded because Gullett left through free agency after 76. He signed with the Yankees, got a big deal, big at the time, not big now. And then the Reds said, well, without Gullett, we've got to have a left-handed starter. And Perez was older. They had Dan Dreesen, a young left-handed hitting first baseman. They wanted to play him. And they thought, well, okay, he can do what Perez did. Ironically, they both drove in the same number of runs in 77, but it was Perez with his personality in the clubhouse, with his leadership, that they were missing. And even though he was older, man, the players really thought, and he was still producing. So they just really thought that was a huge loss. And the clubhouse was not the same without Tony Perez.
When in there did Nolan Ryan sign that $1 million contract?
1980.
Okay, so it was that much later. Mm-hmm. I think 200,000 then is probably what, $5 million today, and we got guys on our roster making $35 million that are hurt all the time. So
right.
The inflation has been exponential. Thinking of all the great pitchers that you witnessed from the box or from the booth, tell me where Seaver ranks at that during that Cincinnati era compared to like the battery of, J.R. Richard, Nolan, Necro, the guys you saw. You watched Maddox. You've seen them all. Right. Where does Seaver rank as far as intimidation and just raw talent?
Oh, he's at the top of the list. Tom Seaver was unbelievable. And he was gutsy. He was smart. He challenged people. He just knew what he was doing. He knew how to prepare. Of course, he was gifted. I talked to, one of the interesting interviews, you may not find it so in the book, is with the Reds trainer, Larry Starr. And Larry said, well, pitchers really didn't have throwing programs in the winter months then. He said Seaver was the only guy I ever knew who did any throwing. And he had this barn where he lived in Connecticut, and he nailed up a mattress to the wall of this barn, and he drew a strike zone on it, and he'd get a bucket of balls and throw into that strike zone. He was the only guy I knew who did any throwing at all in the winter time. And Tom worked a lot on his legs. He was what they called a drop and drive pitcher. So he got down very low, drove toward the plate, and his legs had to be strong in order to pitch that way. And he made sure they were. And the other thing that Tom Hume told me, when Seaver sort of befriended Tom Hume, Tom was struggling. And Seaver gave him some confidence. But he said Seaver would take us in the outfield up against the fence during batting practice, and he'd play pepper. Now, nobody plays pepper anymore, but the batter would choke up on the bat, and you'd toss him the ball, and he'd hit it hard, and there'd be 3 or 4 guys lined up. So he's trying to get them to field with very little reflex time, and this is what pitchers have to do. When those shots are hit back at them, they have to be ready. Well, hardly anybody is anymore, because they're all into this long follow through from throwing 98 miles per hour, and they're just not in a fielding position very often. But he said he'd be hitting these shots at us, and we'd complain about it. And he said, "So you think the batter's going to hit the ball softly right to you?" And, but he was great. He was a fantastic pitcher.
You all recognize the voice. We're visiting with Astros legendary broadcaster Bill Brown. He's got a new book out titled The Cincinnati Reds of the 1970s. It chronicles a dynasty for the ages. It's been 50 years in the making, and sir, just anytime we have the opportunity to visit with you, the stories are endless. I mean, that you were in baseball we were with the Astros for 30, was it 30 seasons or 29?
It was 30. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, all the way through. I used to love listening to you with Alan Ashby. I guess was he the first person to call you Brownie?
No, actually, Tom Seaver was in Cincinnati.
Okay. Well, that's why it stuck. Whatever Mr. Seaver said with the dirt on his right knee from that elevated mound. I bet he was imposing. I've always thought of Garrett Cole being like him.
Sorry to interrupt you, but that's another good point about him. People didn't know this. I didn't know it till he came to Cincinnati, but he wore a knee pad on his right knee because his knee, it banged into the ground when he got low and delivered that pitch. And he would have done some serious damage if he hadn't worn that knee pad under his uniform.
Yeah. Question from one of our listeners, Kyle Kraft asks, how do you compare guys like Seaver, Maddox, Nolan Ryan to some of the current guys like Skeens and others?
I was thinking about Maddox today. I don't know why. Why would an old guy who's not working in the industry anymore wake up and open the refrigerator and think of Greg Maddox? But I knew we were going to be talking, and I thought something, you guys had brought it up, so here's Pandora's box being opened. But I don't think a guy like Greg Maddox would get a look from a major league team today. He didn't throw hard.
A mistake. It would be a mistake, but you're right.
He didn't throw that hard. Everything he threw moved. Everything was on the corner. He was like Seaver in terms of setting up hitters. And Pete Van Wieren, the broadcaster for the Braves, who was outstanding, used to tell me, he said, it's a 90-degree angle there at home plate between the third and first base lines. When Maddox is pitching, they hit the ball to about a 70-degree angle. Nobody ever hits the ball down the line against him. He knows exactly where the guy's going to hit it. He was a perennial Gold Glover. He was ready to field his position. He had good infielders behind him, and he put them to use.
18 Gold Gloves for Greg Maddox. He said he attributed that to growing up, and he said it just very matter-of-factly. When some things are just so true, you just say them. He said most of the guys on major league programs played shortstop at some point. Most of us were the best players on our team, and we played short. And he goes, I had to feel the ball. And he went on to break it down in Maddox form that if I get one out every time I start over the course of a season, that adds up to 10 innings of me getting outs. And he said, that's the difference between, 4 or 5 wins. So because that's adds up to a no-hitter, if you will. So,
another guy from that era who was great with the glove, pitcher, Jim Cott. Jim Cott was a big 6'4" left-hander. He would go out in batting practice, and he'd have one of the coaches hit hard fungo ground balls to him. He'd be between first and second base, and he'd tell the guy, hit as hard as you can. And this is how he got ready to field batted balls. He wanted those difficult plays. And, how can you expect to make a play if you don't ever practice it?
Yeah, no, exactly.
Jonathan Williams, a great baseball friend, says Maddox and ABS would be interesting. When I watched the box, and it seems as though that any part of the box is a strike. So haven't they effectively broadened the strike zone about 5 inches in each direction, maybe 6?
Well, that is the strike zone. If you throw a ball and one stitch catches, a little bit of the white of the plate, that is a strike. And, of course, back in the days of Eric Gregg, you could throw it about 5 baseballs off the corner and get a strike call, but those days are gone.
Well, we Ash and I go back and forth a lot about baseball. I believe that there is a situational strike zone, and that's why I like the human effect of umpiring. There are times that you say that pitch may not have been a strike, but it was too close to take with 2 outs and a full count. You either need to foul it off or drive it into right. I don't want to see you stand there looking for a walk in that situation. And the ABS is going to kind of do away with that.
Yeah. Well, I know no umpire would ever agree with this, but if you're a home plate umpire, you kind of like to ring people up.
Oh, yeah. They like to do it, don't they?
Get that body into it. That's part of the theatrics of it, right? It's part of the show. No, I'm joking, but if you're calling Little League games or, Babe Ruth, you might.
Yeah. What's one story that you had to leave out of this book that you looking back, you wish you could have included it?
Ray Knight. I talked to Ray. You remember Ray?
Oh, yep.
Yes, sir.
He was with the Astros, and unfortunately had a fall recently, and boy, he was in ICU for like 8 days. Fractures in his face, and I felt so bad for him, but he was such a good guy, and he was in the mix to be the third baseman for the Reds in '75 in spring training. He had spent a couple of years in the minors, AAA already, and the problem was Pete Rose wound up moving to third base during that season. And so Ray was at AAA, and John Vukovich, who was the opening day third baseman for the Reds, was sent down in May so Rose could play third base. And Vukovich came up tonight in May, and he said, guess who's playing third base for the Reds tonight? And Ray said, I don't know. He said, Rose. He said, oh. And Vukovich said, do you have a house here or an apartment? He said, I have an apartment. He said, it's a good thing. But if you had a house, you might as well figure on being in it for a few years, because with Rose moving to third base, neither one of us is going to get a chance.
Wow. It's a great story. Yeah.
He wasn't wrong.
I'm waiting for have you written a book about the killer bees?
Not really. No, I haven't.
If you want a salacious, maybe you could write something about the '86 Mets.
Yeah, that would be.
I've heard stories about airplane travel. Did you travel with the team?
Yes.
Back in the day?
Well, Darryl Strawberry was in town here at a prayer breakfast. He's a minister now. And he told everybody, I introduced him. He told this story about when he was a rookie with the Mets, and the guys in the back of the plane made him come back and take some cocaine. And this, it's a sad story. It was rampant in the game at that point. But it shows the peer pressure and how difficult that can be for a rookie to resist.
No doubt.
Wow.
Our buddy Brian Small, he lives in the Hearst, Euless, Bedford area up there. He says, I want Mr. Brown to read the book to me. Is there an extra charge for that?
Well, I am probably going to do an audiobook when I get time. But
Awesome.
yeah.
Well,
I want to try to make it free. So I think there's a guy with a website who will let me do that on his website, and it can be free. So I'll let you guys know.
Cool.
Well, we really appreciate it, and I'd like to reserve the right to call you again. You're always a delight to visit with, and still have so much to give to the game that I know has given you so much. And we appreciate your time, and you're a super, super guy, and I'm proud to call you a friend.
I'm looking forward to really reading this book because, I grew up in Calgary, Alberta, and it seemed like every Saturday on the NBC Game of the Week, the Reds were the team that were on the TV. So I didn't.
Garagiola.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up an Expos fan. And, when Tony Perez got traded there in 77, I kind of hated to see Woody Fryman go, but I was excited to see Perez come to the Expos. We weren't good for another few years after that, but the Reds were always the team on the NBC Game of the Week. And so it was a team that I watched a lot of, really appreciated the way, I tried to pattern my catching style after Johnny Bench. I couldn't hit like him, unfortunately. But so, I mean, this book excites me because I did watch a lot of the Reds growing up during that era.
Well, next time we get together, remind me to tell you, since you're a Calgary guy, my story about Larry Durker and Rusty Staub, which Larry related to me when we were going up Mount Royal in Montreal one time.
We will do.
I will do that. I got a chance to meet Rusty Staub a few years ago, and that was one of the highlights of my baseball, I guess, life. I you don't know this. I did spend a couple of years. Did a little work in AAA and spent a year in rookie ball, and that was a lot of fun doing play-by-play. So, I really enjoyed listening to you over the years, and I think you're one of the best I've ever heard.
Thank you guys so much. I really enjoyed the show.
Thanks for being with us, and have a great week.
Thank you. You too.
That's great. Bill Brown, legendary Astros broadcaster, and as you can tell, he's just an all-around great guy, fine gentleman, wonderful. Speaking of fine gentlemen, Allen's Wrecker Service, 578-6300. Allen's your go-to tow-to. Get in and see Allen if you need him. Give him a call. He'll come to you. He delivers. He'll deliver you wherever you need to be. Went Services for all your generator needs. It's almost storm season. Hook up with Went Electric, Went Services for a Generac, American-made generator, turnkey installation available. You'll be glad you had it. Paravita Wellness and the Vita Cafe. Vita Cafe doing great. Had a great Mother's Day brunch, but Paravita also offering some new fare on their website. Go to Paravita Wellness today. Brand Us, Commander Cody, be back in on Friday. He's doing great things. If you need help with a website, monetizing a Facebook page, whatever the things he doesn't do for us, he can do for you. And don't forget that today is
Caldo Wednesday.
Get into Veracruz today. Folks, we hope you enjoyed that segment. Even if you don't like baseball, you got to appreciate the talent to be a broadcaster at the major league level for over 30 years. Bill Brown, a true Texas legend, recognized. He's in the Media Hall of Fame. He's got the gold jacket that the Astros have. Peter McNally says, great hearing from Brown. Yes, sir. Yep. Awesome. Brian Small says in Canada, they say he's oot at the plate. Folks, we hope you have a great day. Top of the morning to you. And God bless. We'll see you tomorrow.
Bye, folks.